group that focuses on apologetics, and so the organization strives to equip university students and faculty to give an historical, philosophical, and scientific reasons for following Jesus Christ. So we currently are meeting in the Smith Science Building. It's like every other Monday. Our next scheduled meeting is the 14th. If you're interested, we have a table out front that you can come talk to us after the Lyceum. So we are super excited about this, and we're really happy to partner with Wingate University and Lee Park Church to bring in this Lyceum. So just a little bit about Dr. Turek. He is a former aviator in the U.S. Navy. He has a master's degree from George Washington University and a doctorate from the Southern Evangelical Seminary. He is the president of the organization crossexamined.org, which presents evidence for Christianity at college campuses all around the country. He has been the author or co-author on 5 books. We actually have most of those books for sale. If you want to come out after the Lyceum, we take card or cash. And those books are called Hollywood Heroes, How Your Favorite Movies Reveal God, Stealing from God, Why Atheists Need God to Make Their Case, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, Correct, Not Politically Correct, and Legislating Morality. So, like I said, those books will be for sale after the Lyceum if you're interested. He's also debated a lot of prominent atheists, including Christopher Hitchens and Michael Shermer, who's the founder of the Skeptic magazine. And he's been featured in a lot of pop culture, so he's been on Fox News, ABC, and CBS. So, thank you guys for listening to my spiel. If you guys could just welcome Dr. Frank Turek.
Ladies and gentlemen, for those of you who don't know, this is Dozer. Those are the Bulldog here on the Wingate campus. That's right. That's Reagan right there. Well, let's go back to September 29th, 2006. That's when Petty Officer Michael Monsoor, as United States Navy SEAL, operated in Ramadi, Iraq. Monsoor is standing on a roof in Ramadi, and he's standing in front of a doorway to this roof. He has 2 Navy SEAL teammates lying in the sniper-prone position at his feet. They've already taken AK-47 fire and a rocket-propelled grenade, but they're not exactly sure where the enemy is. There's a bit of a lull in the fighting. Insurgents have blocked off the streets in Ramadi, and there's someone on the loudspeaker in the town mosque yelling, "Kill the Americans!" As Monsoor and his team are looking for the next attack, an insurgent from an unknown location throws a grenade up on the roof. It hits Monsoor in the chest, and it falls to his feet. Due to the length of the throw, there's no opportunity to pick it up and throw it back. He has only a split second to make a decision. He can leap through the doorway behind him and save himself, but if he does, his 2 teammates lying at his feet will surely die. Monsoor yells, "Grenade!" But instead of jumping backward to save himself, he jumps forward, chest first, onto the grenade. It detonates. 30 minutes later, 25-year-old Michael Monsoor is dead. His 2 teammates lying on the roof receive only minor injuries because Monsoor's body muffled the blast. One of the survivors said at Monsoor's funeral, "Mikey looked death in the face that day and said, 'You will not take my friends, I will go in their stead.'" I've never seen a United States president cry until April of 2008. That's when President George W. Bush invited Monsoor's parents into the East Room of the White House to give them their son's Medal of Honor posthumously. The president couldn't even get through the citation without breaking down. Since then, Monsoor's high school in Garden Grove, California, built a new stadium. They named it Michael A. Monsoor Memorial Stadium. The golden trident insignia that the SEALs wear dominates the 50-yard line. January 2019, North Island, California, just outside of San Diego, the United States Navy commissioned the USS Michael Monsoor, the newest guided missile destroyer in the fleet. Zumwalt class. This is Mansour's mother, Sally, being escorted onto the ship named in honor of her fallen son. Now, why did they do that? Because Michael Mansour literally sacrificed himself to save his friends. There's no greater love than to sacrifice yourself to save your friends, said Jesus of Nazareth before he went to the cross. Michael Mansour sacrificed himself to save his friends. The question is, would anyone sacrifice himself to save you? And the answer is, someone already has. His name is Jesus of Nazareth. But in today's culture, a lot of people don't think the story's true. They think it's invented. They think it's made up. I mean, after all, it's got miracles in it, like a resurrection. We don't see resurrections anymore. How can we believe in such a thing? Well, I actually think it's quite easy to show that Christianity is true. You only need to answer 4 questions to show that Christianity is true. In other words, if you investigate these 4 questions, I think you'll realize that the answer to these 4 questions is yes. And if the answer to these 4 questions is yes, then Christianity is true. What are the 4 questions? Here are the 4 questions. Is some pretty groovin' music, isn't it? Yeah, that's actually from our TV show, which is on every Wednesday nights at 9 p.m. It's on DirecTV. It's also on Roku. If you don't have DirecTV or you don't have Roku, it's on this new technology sweeping the Charlotte area right now. It's called the Internet. Have you guys heard of the Internet? Yeah, it's actually on our website, streaming tonight, Wednesday, 9 p.m., crossexamine.org is our website. Also on radio every Saturday morning at a number of stations around the country, 10 a.m. I know if you're a college student, you don't get up until the crack of noon on Saturday, so you're not listening to it then, but the program is called I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, and what we do is we present evidence for Christianity, and we cross-examine ideas against it. Now, why are these the 4 questions? Truth, God, miracles, and the New Testament. Well, first question, does truth exist? Why is that important? Because you hear people saying there is no truth, you got your truth, I got my truth, all truth is relative. Well, if there's no truth, obviously Christianity can't be true. Of course, if there's no truth, atheism can't be true either. Now, ladies and gentlemen, if there was no truth, would you ever go to school? I mean, what are you here to learn? You're not here to learn opinions, right? Would you ever read a book if there was no truth? If there was no truth, could you ever call somebody out on a lie? No, lies presuppose truth, right? So there is truth. We're going to cover that here in a minute. Second question, does God exist? I hope to show you tonight that God really does exist. Obviously, Christianity can't be true unless there's a God. We're going to look at 3 arguments for the existence of God. And these 3 arguments, while they're taught in the Bible, you don't need the Bible to know them. In fact, we're going to try and establish point 2 with the answer yes without ever referring to any religious book. You can show that God exists without reference to any religious book. Third question, are miracles possible? Why is that important? Because Christianity believes in miracles, especially the miracle of Jesus rising from the dead. If Jesus hasn't risen from the dead, your faith is in vain. As even the greatest apostle wrote, Paul, in his first letter to the Corinthians, he says, if Christ hasn't risen from the dead, your faith's in vain. So if miracles are not possible, Christianity can't be true. But I hope to show you tonight that not only are miracles possible, but the greatest miracle in the Bible has already occurred, and even atheists are admitting the evidence for this miracle. Then the key question, is the New Testament true? The New Testament doesn't have a prayer if there's no truth, no God, or no miracles. But if truth exists, if God exists, if miracles are possible, then we can see if the documents are reliable enough to let us know if one particular event from the ancient world took place, and that event would be the resurrection. Because if Jesus rose from the dead, game over, Christianity's true. Of course, if he didn't rise from the dead, game over, it's false. You might as well sleep in on Sunday and do what you want the rest of the week, because if Jesus hasn't risen from the dead, it's false. So you can actually investigate this and see if it's true. Now, from this point, you can get into more argumentation to show that the entire Bible is true, and that's what we do in the book. And generally, it goes like this. If Jesus predicted and accomplished his own resurrection from the dead, then he's God. And whatever God teaches is true. Jesus taught the entire Old Testament as the Word of God, and he promised the New Testament. You say, well, I trust Jesus. Look, I just have a personal policy. If somebody predicts and accomplishes his own resurrection from the dead, I just trust whatever the guy says. All right? Now, we're not going to have time to go through all of these points here tonight. We're going to spend most of our time on point 1 and point 2, and I'll mention a little bit of point 3. We'll save point 3 and 4 largely for Q&A. Maybe next semester we can come back and do those next two, but it's hard to get through all this in one sitting. So we're going to start right here at point 1. Does truth exist? Are you guys ready to go? Are you guys ready to go? All right, good. All right, whenever you start talking about truth, you always have to start with Jack Nicholson. Right? Because Tom Cruise had him on the witness stand, and he said to him, Colonel, I want the truth. And Nicholson said, Wingate. If he said it that way, the movie would have gone nowhere. You can't handle the truth. That's not how he said it. Here's how he said it. You can't handle the truth. All right, let's try it again. I want the truth. You can't handle the truth. Now that felt better, didn't it? Didn't that feel better? Didn't you always want to do that in this auditorium? Some professor up here is going, rambling on, and you go, you can't handle the truth. Well, there's a lot of people, it appears today, that can't handle the truth. They're saying, you got your truth, I got my truth, all truth is relative. Well, all those statements are false. And it's actually very easy to show that they're false. In fact, I think this is the most important thinking skill that you can learn. In fact, to show you what a dimwit I was 33 years old, I already had a master's degree, and I didn't know what I'm about to tell you right now. And it's so simple. All it is applying a law of logic called the law of non-contradiction. Unfortunately, we don't teach logic anymore. We ought to, because logic is the gateway to finding truth, good thinking. And I want to show you this thinking skill. And once you get good at this thinking skill, it's going to save you from a lot of pain and suffering. Why? Because half the battle in life is identifying what is false. Because if you can identify what is false, then you can stay away from that and concentrate on what is true. If you start living by false principles, eventually you're going to smack up against reality, and it's going to hurt. So here's the thinking skill. The easiest way of showing you the thinking skill is to give you an example of using it. If someone were to ever say to you, there is no truth, you should ask that person a question. What should the question be? Yeah, if somebody says there's no truth, you want to say, hey, is that true? Is it true that there's no truth? Because if it's true that there's no truth, the claim there is no truth can't be true, but it claims to be true. Did I say that right? Can everybody see that this is a self-defeating statement? What's a self-defeating statement? A self-defeating statement doesn't meet its own standard. A self-defeating statement violates the law of non-contradiction, which says that opposite ideas cannot both be true at the same time and in the same sense. So to say there's no truth would be like me saying, I can't speak a word in English. If I were to say I can't speak a word in English, what would you say? Yeah, you just used English to say it, right? This is a self-defeating statement. And here's the thinking skill. What you want to do is you want to turn the claim on itself. Turn the claim on itself. So if somebody says there is no truth, you turn the claim on itself and you ask, is that true? Okay, let's do a few more of these because there's many of these in our culture. Sometimes it isn't said this way. Sometimes it's said this way. There's no such thing as absolute truth. If someone were to say that and you were to turn the claim on itself, what question would you ask back? Yeah, is that an absolute truth claim? Or you might say, are you absolutely sure? Do you see that this is an absolute truth claim claiming there are no absolute truths? It's like saying I can't speak a word in English. Or it's like saying my parents had no kids that lived. All right? These are self-defeating statements. Now, it's not always said this way. Today, it's more often said maybe this way. All truth is relative. You probably heard people say that. Somebody says all truth is relative. You turn the claim on itself, and you're going to say what? Is that a relative truth? No, again, This is an absolute truth claiming all truth is relative. Again, it's like saying I can't speak a word in English. Probably the most popular way it's said today now, however, is this way. There isn't the truth, only my truth. You have your truth, I have my truth. You live your truth, I'll live my truth, we'll all get along. Sounds so reasonable, doesn't it? Sounds like we all ought to believe this, right? It sounds like this is so Oprah, like everybody should agree. But there's a problem. What's the problem with somebody says, there isn't the truth, only my truth? If you turn the claim on itself, what question might you ask back? You might say, is that just your truth, or is this up here the truth? If you're saying this statement up here is just your truth, in other words, it's just your opinion, then why should I believe it? But if you're saying this statement up here is the truth, well, the first half of the statement says there aren't any the truths. Do you realize that this is a the truth statement saying there are no the truths? Are you with me? Now, I know it's very unpopular to say this in our culture, but there's no such thing as your truth or my truth. There's just the truth. To say that you have your truth and I have my truth would be like me saying, I have my own math. I mean, imagine if you hire me to do something around your house or dorm room or whatever. You say, Frank, come over, I need some help. I'll pay you $10 an hour. And I come over and I work for 15 hours. And you say, well, how long did you work? And I go, 15 hours. So you owe me $150,000. And you look at me and go, $150,000? I owe you 150, not 150,000. And I go, oh, no, you don't understand. I have my own math. You're going to go, what are you, crazy? There's not my math or your math. There's just math. There's not my truth or your truth. There's just truth. And to claim otherwise is to actually say that there are no the truths, which actually is the truth. Now, sometimes it's actually said like this. It's true for you, but not for me. Well, Christianity may be true for you, but Buddhism's true for me. What do you say to that? This is the interactive portion of the program. What do you say to that? This is actually self-defeating as well. It's just a little bit more subtle. If somebody says it's true for you but not for me, say, hey, is that true for everybody? Is true for you but not for me true for everybody? Because if true for you but not for me is true for everybody, then true for you but not for me can't be true because it's true for everybody. Did I say that right? I know that can give you intellectual constipation if you think about it long enough. But that's because it's self-defeating. It defeats itself. Actually, there's a more fun way of dealing with this. If somebody says it's true for you but not for me, say, sure, go try that with your bank teller. Yeah, go to your bank teller one day and say, look, the economy's down, inflation's up, I need extra money. Give me $100,000 out of my account. Bank teller looks your account and says, I'm sorry, I only have $6.14 in your account. It's easy to get the money. You simply say, ha, that's true for you but not for me. Give me the $100,000. Are you going to get the money? No, if there was only $6.14 in your account, that's true for all people at all times in all places when referring to your account at that time. It's just true. By the way, same thing is true about religious claims. Look, either God exists or he doesn't exist. Regardless of what you believe about it. In fact, I go to a lot of churches. I normally ask people, do you think Christianity is true? And many people will say yes, and then I'll say, why? You know what answer I get more than any other? Because I have faith. Is that a good answer? Does your faith change whether or not God exists or Jesus rose from the dead or the Bible writers are telling the truth? No, your faith doesn't change those things at all. Either he exists or he doesn't. Either he rose from the dead or he didn't. Either they're telling the truth or they didn't. Or they're not. I mean, do you have to believe something to make it true? Do you have to believe in gravity to stay on the ground? Do people who don't believe in gravity float away? Hey, look, there's another one. Hey, if you believe, you'll come back. No, that's not the way it works. You say, why is the Bible always talking about faith then? Because there's two kinds of faith. This is a very important distinction. There's belief that, and then there's belief in. Belief that is getting evidence that God exists, that Jesus rose from the dead, that these writers are telling us the truth. That's what we call apologetics. It doesn't mean we're saying we're sorry. It comes from a Greek word, which means to give a defense or give evidence. But all the belief that in the world won't get your moral transgressions forgiven. For that, you got to go from belief that to belief in. You see, belief that is just of the head. Belief in is not only of the head, it's of the heart. In fact, James, the half-brother of Jesus, who wrote that little book in the New Testament called, you guys are sharp tonight. They didn't know that at Harvard. James says, even the demons believe that God exists, but they tremble. Do you know that if God exists and if demons exist, that demons know that God exists better than we do? Right? But they don't trust in him. Well, they don't want to trust in him. You can know something's true and yet reject it, can't you? In fact, we know this in relationships. When I first met my wife 37 years ago, I got evidence that she would be a good wife, but all the evidence in the world didn't make her my wife. I had to take a step of trust in her to ask her to be my wife. And in a momentary lapse of judgment, she said yes. That's the difference between believe that and belief in. And you ladies, you know this. Suppose you're dating a guy, you really like him, you want him to marry you. And at one point he goes, you know what? You would really make a great wife. And that's all he said. What would you be doing? You'd be going, yeah. Yeah. He's got all belief that. No belief in. If he truly believed in, he would ask you, wouldn't he? That's the difference between belief that and belief in. And most of the time when the Bible's talking about faith, it's talking about belief in. It says, after you know that Jesus rose from the dead, then trust in him because he has paid for your moral transgressions. Now, if you don't want to trust in him, you don't have to. You can reject him. In fact, if you don't want him now, you're not going to want him in eternity. If you reject him now, God is not going to force you into heaven against your will. So there's a difference between belief that and belief in. Now, you've probably heard this statement too. There's no truth in anything but science. What's the problem with this? Dr. Plummer, he is an organic chemistry teacher here, right? And he's into science. But do you get all your truth from science? Turn the claim on itself. Somebody says this, what would you say back? Yeah, that's right. You say, can you go in the laboratory and prove that? Is this a scientific claim? Is this a scientific truth? No, that's not a scientific truth. That's a philosophical claim. That's not a statement of science. That's a statement about science. In fact, you can't do science without philosophy. Science is built on philosophy. When you get a PhD, what does the PH stand for? Philosophy. Philosophy of physics, philosophy of biology, philosophy of history, whatever it is. In fact, in the book out there, Stealing from God, we have a chapter on science. Here's the title of the chapter. Science doesn't say anything. Scientists do. Why do I say that? Because you hear people saying all the time, science says we have to do this. Science says it. No, science doesn't say a word. Scientists say things. Why? Because all data needs to be gathered and all data needs to be interpreted. And who does that? Scientists do that. And sometimes scientists will get good data and they'll interpret it properly and you'll get good advice. Sometimes they'll have bad data. Doesn't matter how they interpret it, you're going to get bad advice. Sometimes they'll have good data, don't interpret it right, you get bad advice. Sometimes there's a political agenda and you're not going to get good advice. Science is done by scientists, and sometimes scientists don't get it right. Sometimes they have reasons not to get it right. Now, science has made our life so much more comfortable. We couldn't be doing this 100 years ago, right? No air conditioning, all right? We probably wouldn't be here anyway. We wouldn't have developed the South as much as it is now. So science has made our lives comfortable and more lengthy. But the most important things in life have nothing to do with science. Honey, do you love me? Yeah. Why? I don't know. Let's run an experiment. No. Or how about this? You hear this a lot. You should doubt everything. This is a skeptical claim. What's the problem with the claim? Someone says you should doubt everything. Turn the claim on itself. What question are you going to ask? Yeah, should I doubt that? Why are skeptics skeptical of everything but skepticism? You ever notice that? They think it's true. Now, how many people in here regardless of what you believe about God, Christian, atheist, anywhere in between. How many people in here sometimes doubt that what you believe about God is true? Look, if you don't have your hand up right now, you're probably not thinking very much. Look, I've written books on this stuff, and sometimes I wake up in the morning, I go, I don't even know if this is true. You ever do that? But then I start thinking about my doubts, and I realize most of my doubts are emotional. They're not intellectual. In other words, the evidence for Christianity is good. If I'm having a good day, everything's fine. Bad day, don't know. Good day, fine. Bad day, don't know. Good day, fine. Bad day, don't know. What's changing, me or the evidence? Me, I'm going up and down. The evidence hasn't changed. I've changed. My psychology is getting the better of me. Do you realize that your psychology will not tell you the truth about what's outside your skull? The evidence will. Don't concentrate on your psychology. Example, a lot of people can't get on an airplane. They're just scared to death. But from an evidentiary perspective, it's safer to fly from this side of the room to the other side than to walk there. You should be afraid to get in your car rather than get on an airplane. But some of us are allowing our psychology to overcome the evidence. We think flying is dangerous. It's not. Driving's more dangerous. Don't let your psychology overcome the truth or the evidence. Your eternity is built on evidence, not your psychology. So, I think if you start looking at the evidence, you'll realize that Christianity is true, and then you can start doubting your doubts. And if you start doubting your doubts, then you're back to knowing something for sure. Have you guys ever thought about doubting your doubts? I doubt it. This is the granddaddy of them all. You ought not judge. Jesus said, don't judge. Why are you judging, you hypocrites? All right, let's leave Jesus aside for just a moment. Logically, what's the problem with the claim? Yeah, somebody says you ought not judge. You might want to say, hey, isn't that a judgment? Or you could say, if they say don't judge, you might also say, then why are you judging me for judging? You see, this is a judgment. You say, wait a minute, Frank. Didn't Jesus say don't judge? Nope, never said it. Sure he did. He said it in Matthew chapter 7, verse 1. That's the Great Commission. Or, I'm sorry, that's the Sermon on the Mount. It's right in the middle of the Sermon on the Mount. All right, I know it's going to sound weird for you Bible people here for just a minute, but it's not. There are no verses in the Bible. There are no verses in the Bible. Do you think when Matthew was writing his biography of Jesus, which we call the Gospel of Matthew, that he said, here's chapter 7, verse 1? No. When were the chapter and verse divisions added? About 500 years ago to help us navigate the text, which is really important. Why? Because if you didn't have numbers in your Bible, it'd be hard to find your way around. Imagine if you went to church one Sunday morning and your pastor got up there and he opened his Bible. He didn't have numbers in his Bible. You didn't have numbers in yours. And he said, let's go about 2/3 of the way in. Let's see if we can find the same spot. No, you wouldn't be able to do that, right? You need numbers to navigate. The problem is we tend to think if it's got a number in front of it, we can take it out and make it say whatever we want. We need to read around the passage. What is Matthew 7:1? It doesn't stop there. What does it say after that? He says, judge not, lest you be judged. By the same standard you judge others, you'll be judged by that standard. So before you try and take the speck out of your brother's eye, you hypocrite, which is a judgment, by the way, take the log out of your own eye first, then you'll be better able to help your brother. Is Jesus telling us not to judge here? No, he's telling us to take the speck out of our brother's eye. That involves making a judgment. He's simply saying, get that problem out of your life first so you can better help your brother. So this is not a command not to judge. It's actually a command on how to judge. Don't judge hypocritically. If you've got that problem, fix it, then go help your brother. But it would be completely ridiculous to say don't make judgments. Why? Number one, it's a judgment itself. Number two, you'd be dead already if you didn't make judgments. You made 100 judgments today. I mean, just getting over here. Good choices from bad choices. Safe choices from dangerous choices. And now you're going, this was a bad judgment. This guy's crazy. What's he talking about? No, everybody makes judgments. Atheists make judgments. They judge there's no God. They judge Jesus didn't rise from the dead. They judge the Bible's not telling the truth. They judge there is no objective meaning to life. In fact, when you die, you're just going to become worm food. It's over. There is no hope. Have a nice day. These are all judgments. The question isn't whether or not you can make judgments. The question is, Are your judgments true? I will say this, however, that Jesus did save a very stern rebuke for people who were judgmental. And who were the judgmental ones in his day? The Pharisees. And who were the Pharisees? What was their job? What did they do? They interpreted the law. They were the religious politicians. They were lawmakers of the day. Some of them were on the Sanhedrin. That was the Jewish ruling council to whom Rome delegated much of the day-to-day legal authority. They were the politicians of Israel. And Jesus went after these people. Are you telling me Jesus got involved in politics? Yes! And he wasn't so nice doing it. In fact, if you think Jesus was a sweet guy who's never said a bad word about anyone, you have not read John chapter 2, John chapter 8, or Matthew chapter 23. What happens in John chapter 2? Jesus makes a whip, and he goes and he jacks people up in the temple. What? Sweet and gentle Jesus did this? Yes! And then in John chapter 8, he's having an argument with these Pharisees, these religious politicians, and he's right in the middle of the argument with them, and he says, your father is the devil. Jesus, you can't say that. That's not very Christ-like. Excuse me, I am Christ. Can you imagine you're having an argument with somebody, and you stop right in the middle, and you go, your father is the devil. Never try that with a sibling, by the way. And then in Matthew chapter 23, Jesus again is going after these Pharisees, and he says to them, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You strain out a gnat and swallow a camel. Oh, you look great on the outside, you're whitewashed tombs, but on the inside, you're full of dead men's bones. You go a mile to make a convert, and then once you make them a convert, you make them twice as much a son of hell as you are. How will you avoid being condemned to hell? What? Sweet and gentle Jesus said this? Yes, Jesus was not Barney. Can't we all get along, boys and girls? No! I came to bring a sword. It's going to divide mother from daughter, father from son. In fact, Jesus was tough. Why did they kill Jesus? Why did they kill him? He did threaten their way of life, and he also claimed to be God. See, if you claim to be God, that's blasphemy to the Jews. If you claim to be the king of the Jews, that's going to be a problem for the Romans. You see, it's blasphemy to the Jews and sedition to the Romans. So Jesus was killed. He wasn't killed for skipping around saying, love your neighbor, right? Love your neighbor. You must die. No, that doesn't happen. You get killed for claiming to be God, or perhaps taking power from people. In fact, Caiaphas, the high priest who sentenced Jesus to die, I think he knew that Jesus was the Messiah, because right after Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead, Caiaphas says, it's better that one innocent man die than the whole nation perish. He knew, but he didn't want his power to be taken from him, because if Jesus succeeded, he was out of a job. By the way, you want to know why some of us sin? In fact, all of us sin. What are the three great motivators that cause us to sin? Sex, money, power. Those are the three reasons why people will murder. They're the same three reasons why any of us do evil. Why? Because sex, money, and power are good things. The problem is they're so good, we'll often take shortcuts to get them. So Caiaphas didn't want to lose his power. Jesus spoke truth to that power, and then he was murdered. Thankfully, it was for our benefit. By the way, I've noticed one other thing about judging. You ever notice that when you compliment somebody, which is a judgment, nobody gets upset? You know, if you say to your best friend, I really love you, you're such a wonderful person, I wish I could be like you. You think your friend's going to say, well, who are you to judge? Right? No, your friend's never going to say that. You see, I've noticed that people don't have a problem with judging. They just have a problem with judgments they don't like. In fact, if you tell somebody something that's true and they get mad at you, you just help convict them. As Augustine said, we love the truth when it enlightens us. We hate the truth when it convicts us. For you military people in here, and by the way, I was in the Navy for 8 years, which stands for never again volunteer yourself. For you military people in here, you always get more flack when you're over the target. If you tell somebody something that's true and they're shooting back at you, you're over the target. They don't want their evil deeds exposed. Jesus said, men love darkness rather than light. So we have to make judgments, but we have to make judgments without being judgmental. Somebody put it this way: evangelism is just one beggar showing another beggar where the food is. Look, if Christianity is true, no one's getting there on our own merits. We're going to be forgiven based on his work, not ours. So there's nothing to be judgmental about. Now, we could spend more time going through more of these, but we don't have time, so we got to move on. I just want to point out and just show everybody. Can everybody see that this statement right here shoots itself? Can everyone see that? And all the other statements we went through shoot themselves. They can't be true. In fact, this is why, ladies and gentlemen, that relativism and postmodernism can't be true. They're self-defeating. They claim it's true that there is no truth. So you can't get away from truth. Actually, you can get away from truth temporarily. How do you get away from truth temporarily? You suppress it to go your own way. Paul talks about this in Romans chapter 1. I see this quite a bit, actually. We go to a lot of college campuses. This actually happens to be a picture from the University of Wisconsin at Madison. And they love the Bible about as much as the University of California at Berkeley does. And when atheists get up to the microphone, if they express any hostility, I normally ask a question. And the reason I'm telling you this is because if you're an atheist here, thank you for being here. But if you get up to the microphone, I may ask you a question, and it's not fair of me to do that unless I tell you what the question is in advance. So here's the question. If Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? I've had atheists stand at that microphone in front of hundreds of people and say, no! No. Wait, I thought you claimed to be reasonable. How is it reasonable? You wouldn't believe something if it were true. It's not reasonable. The problem isn't in the head, the problem's in the heart. They don't want it to be true. They don't want there to be a God. Why? Because they want to be God of their own lives. They're not on a truth quest, they're on a happiness quest. And they're just going to believe whatever they think is going to make them happy. Here's the problem. You can make yourself happy over the short term doing a lot of fun, selfish things, but over the long term, it's a disaster. And everyone in this room over 40 knows what I'm talking about because many of us have tried it ourselves. Yeah, you do a lot of fun, selfish things without regard to others. You know what's going to happen? You're going to wind up broke. You're going to wind up addicted. You're going to wind up alone. And you're eventually going to wind up prematurely dead. You just can't create your own reality. And we don't help people by telling them they can. If you want contentment, you got to go straight through truth. And Jesus is the truth. Now, one other thing about this, I realize there's probably a lot of people in this room that have been wronged by Christians, and you don't want to have anything to do with Christianity. I get it. But I want to ask you a question that's asked by the Australian historian John Dixon. He asked this question. When somebody plays Beethoven poorly, who do you blame? You don't blame Beethoven. You blame the player, right? So when somebody plays Christ poorly, you don't blame Jesus. When I play Jesus poorly, I'm not Christianity. When you play Jesus poorly, you're not Christianity. In fact, Christianity is not Christians. Christianity is Jesus. So just because I'm not true and beautiful doesn't mean Jesus isn't true and beautiful. Don't allow somebody who treated you poorly to keep you out of the kingdom. Because that person isn't God. In fact, if that person was perfect, he wouldn't need Jesus. The reason that we need Jesus is because we are flawed. None of us are perfect. This is why when I debated Christopher Hitchens a number of years ago, you guys know who Christopher Hitchens was? He was a brilliant British atheist who sounded more brilliant than he was because he had a British accent. And at one point I said to him, Christopher, a lot of what you write in your book, God is not great, how religion poisons everything, is true. Religious people have done a lot of horrific things, but you have no standard by which to judge them wrong. And secondly, you should expect religious people to do evil, just like everybody else, because we're fallen. In fact, I said to him, Christopher, I'm a hypocrite. I can't live up to what Jesus told me to live up to. But if I could, I wouldn't need him. If I was perfect, I wouldn't need a Savior. And so when people say, Frank, I can't go to church because there's too many hypocrites down there, I always say, come on down, pal. We got room for one more. We're all hypocrites. The church is a hospital for sinners. It's not a country club for saints. So I may ask you the question, if Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? Now, we know truth exists. The next question, is it true that God actually exists? And I mentioned there are going to be three arguments for the existence of God. The first argument is the argument for the beginning of the universe, known as the cosmological argument. Cosmological comes from the Greek word cosmos, which means world or universe. And it says if the universe had a beginning, then it must have had a beginner. The second argument is the argument from design, known as the teleological argument. Telos is a Greek word meaning design or purpose. And it says if there's design in the universe and design in you, life, there has to be a designer. Now, these two arguments have some scientific evidence behind them. We'll see some of that. The third argument doesn't have any science behind it. It's more philosophical in nature, yet it's the argument we've all known since we were very small children. It's an intuitive argument. It's the argument from morality known as the moral argument. And it says that there's one thing morally wrong out there, just one. Like it's wrong to torture babies for fun. Or it's wrong to murder 6 million people in a Holocaust. Then there has to be a God. Why? Because if there is no standard beyond humanity, then everything's just a matter of opinion. That's just your opinion against a baby torturer's opinion. That's just your opinion against Hitler's opinion. If there's no standard beyond us, everything's a matter of opinion. But we know it's not a matter of opinion. We know torturing babies for fun isn't just a matter of opinion. It's really wrong. If it's really wrong, there must be a standard beyond us that's really right, and we're obligated to obey that standard. That standard is God's nature. We'll get to that later. But we got to start right here at the cosmological argument. Now, you got to admit, it was worth coming here tonight just to see God do that. Wasn't it? Now, some of you are saying, look, I've never seen God move. Oh, really? Check this out. Look at that. Now, this is the argument that many say points back to the big... Now, I know there's some Christians here going, Frank, we're Christians here. We don't believe in the Big Bang. You guys don't believe in the Big Bang? I believe in the Big Bang. I just know who banged it. In fact, the evidence for the Big Bang is so good that even atheistic scientists are admitting it. Stephen Hawking, probably the top physicist in the world, until he died about 5 years ago, he was an atheist, put it this way. He said, almost everyone now believes that the universe and time itself had a beginning at the Big Bang. Now, Hawking tried to come up with another explanation other than God. He failed, but he's admitting the evidence that space, time, and matter literally came into existence out of nothing. Agnostic cosmologist Alexander Vilenkin, who teaches at Tufts University, put it this way. He said, with the proof now in place, cosmologists, and by the way, a cosmologist is not someone that puts on your makeup, all right? Cosmologist studies the universe. Cosmologists can no longer hide behind the possibility of a past eternal universe. There is now no escape. They have to face the problem of a cosmic beginning. Now, two interesting words here. First word proof. Unusual for scientists to use the word proof. Why? Because science, by definition, is tentative. There can always be new evidence that comes in that overturns the theory. And many scientific theories have been overturned. So why is he calling it a proof? Because he sees so many lines of evidence point to the same conclusion, that space, matter, and time had a beginning, that he thinks it constitutes a proof. The other interesting word is the word problem. Why is it a problem if there's a cosmic beginning? Because if there was a beginning to nature, space, matter, time, nature couldn't have caused the universe. There must be something outside of nature. We'll get to that in a minute. In fact, we're not going to look at the evidence for this. Why? Number one, we don't have time. Number two, it's all in the book, chapter 3. Number three, it's not controversial. Even atheists are admitting it. What is controversial is how do you interpret the evidence? What could have caused the universe to come into existence? It seems to me we got two options. Either, if the universe had a beginning, then we must have had a beginner, it seems. Either no one created something out of nothing, which is the atheistic view, or someone created something out of nothing, which is the theistic view. Now, here's my only question. Which view is more reasonable? That no one created something out of nothing or someone created something out of nothing? What do you think? Someone. I was at Texas A&M, had to be 15 years ago, and an atheist in the audience said, oh, I think number one is more reasonable. I said, time out. Let's look at number two. Number two says someone created something out of nothing. Now that's a miracle, right? But at least you got a miracle worker. You got someone. Number one is a miracle with no miracle worker. That's clearly absurd. In fact, do you realize that everybody believes in at least one miracle? Christians believe in more than one, but atheists believe in one. They believe that no one created something out of nothing. You're saying, Frank, I don't believe you. I'll show you one here in just a minute. It seems to me that if space, matter, and time had a beginning out of nothing, what could have created that? Seems to me if space, matter, and time had a beginning, the cause must be spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful to create the universe out of nothing, personal in order to choose to create, also intelligent to have a mind to make a choice. Now, ladies and gentlemen, when you think about a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, intelligent cause, who do you think of? You say God. You say, well, how do you know it's the Christian God, Frank? We don't. We don't know if this is a Christian God. This could be Allah or some other theistic or deistic God. But if we keep going through the questions and we get to the New Testament and we realize that Jesus really did rise from the dead, then we can say that the same being that created space, matter, and time is the same being that walked out of the tomb 1,989 years ago. In his human nature, in his divine nature, he created the universe out of nothing. But we haven't gotten there yet. All we have here from one argument is a being that looks like a cause that's spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, and intelligent. Now you might say, Frank, really? There are people that believe this? Yeah, in fact, here's a question asked people who are atheists, is to ask them, if there is no God, why is there something rather than nothing at all? This is a question Leibniz posed, the philosopher, many years ago. If there is no God, why does anything exist? Now you might say, Frank, really people believe that nothing created the universe? That the universe came into existence out of nothing? Yeah, have you ever heard of Lawrence Krauss? Anyone here heard of Lawrence Krauss? Lawrence Krauss was a physicist who taught at Arizona State a number of years ago, wrote a book called The Universe from Nothing, in which he tries to explain how the universe could come into existence from nothing and by nothing. Now there's just one problem with Krauss's thesis. His nothing is not nothing. It's something. It's a quantum realm. And even atheist colleagues of him have pointed that out to him. Your nothing is not nothing. In fact, his nothing wasn't really nothing to the point where even Stephen Colbert could point out that his argument didn't work. You guys know who Stephen Colbert is, right? Before he was on CBS, he was on a program called The Colbert Report on the Comedy Central channel. Do you remember that? And when this book came out, he had Lawrence Krauss on, and I think Colbert did a great job just interviewing him. I'm going to show you the interview. You can find this on YouTube. It's about 5 minutes long. As you watch this, watch how many times that Lawrence Krauss refers to nothing as something. In other words, he talks about the laws of gravity, the laws of quantum mechanics. He says if you wait long enough, wait, there's no time. What do you mean you're waiting long enough? Anyway, Colbert does a good job on this. Check this out.
Sweep away thousands of years of mystery and awe at creation that let the greatest minds in civilizations all over the world to lead to one point, a single divine loving creator. Destroy it. Why is there someone instead of nothing?
It's really easy because nothing's unstable. And in fact, there's no evidence for any deity. Everything we know about the laws of physics, which are remarkable, and have changed everything about the way we think about the universe, what nothing is and what something is. This table here is mostly empty space.
This table cost me $500. You tell me I got ripped off? Well, no, wait, let's go back a second, okay? Nothing is unstable. What do you mean that nothing is unstable? Nothingness is nothingness.
Well, physics has changed what we mean by nothing. In fact, nothing is an empty space, is a boiling, bubbling brew of virtual particles popping in and out of existence.
Oh, wait, that's not nothing, that's something. Why are those virtual particles there?
Because of the laws of quantum mechanics. And they tell us that even though you can try and count and see what's in there in empty space, you'll see nothing. But in fact, one of the biggest mysteries, the reason I wrote the book, one of the greatest discoveries in the last 50 years is that, in fact, empty space weighs something.
Empty space weighs something.
In fact, it's the dominant stuff in the universe.
No, I am never going to lose those last 5 pounds. Okay, you say there are 3 different types of nothing.
That's right.
What are the 3? I didn't know there was such a variety. A sampler platter
I would have thought you'd be an expert on it. But
nothingness? Yes.
In any case, there are 3 different kinds of nothing. First, empty space, which I would say is probably the nothing in the Bible, an eternal, dark, empty void.
You mean like a true hard vacuum? That's nothing you're talking about?
Most people would have thought that would be nothing.
That's what I think nothing is.
And that
also multiple.
But then if I tell you that kind of nothing actually is unstable, if you wait long enough, that kind of nothing will always produce particles.
Well, how will it? By saying that it will,
if you wait long enough, the laws of quantum mechanics tell us that particles will burp out of empty space and eventually fill out the universe.
Is it coming? That, to me, that sounds like the empty space may be empty to us, but it is some sort of sheath or membrane between us and some other reality.
No, there's nothing. Well, there's absolutely nothing there until there's something.
What's the second type of nothing?
Okay, well then if you don't buy that, then I can say, well, you might say, well, that's not nothing because there's space.
Yeah.
Well, it turns out if you apply quantum mechanics to gravity, then in fact, space itself becomes dynamical, and universes, spaces themselves, at any time, can pop into existence where there was none before.
So in some theoretical end space, before the moment of creation, there can be no time and no space and no energy.
And no energy.
And then suddenly, from nowhere and from nothing, comes something and someone.
And all sorts of stuff. And it sounds like the ultimate free lunch.
Yes, it is.
It is. And it really, what's remarkable is it's possible without the supernatural shenanigans.
But Tony says, stop with that.
Why?
Why is what you're doing, whatever this is? Because I am not in the priesthood. I can't understand the scrawls on the blackboards you people down at where are you?
Well, that's why I wrote a book, so you could.
Where are you?
Arizona.
Okay. You priests of theoretical physics, you can explain to each other what you mean with your language of math, and I have to take that as faith.
No, in fact, you should be skeptical.
I am.
And in fact, you should be. And that's why I try to write the arguments in the book.
But I will never read it.
It's
People should, you should buy it.
Buying it is important.
Buying is good. But why does what you're saying have to be an attack on my God?
It doesn't have to be an attack.
That's all you've done. You've attacked my God for the last 6 minutes.
No, you have. All I've said is you don't need them.
That's an attack.
No, we're here to what is absurd, as we understand it, is we've changed our minds about the universe. We've learned that the universe is more remarkable than anything we ever thought before. And in fact, changing your mind and in fact being wrong is wonderful. You should try it sometime. It's really amazing. It means that the fact that the universe is more remarkable than the fairy tales that were talked about by Bronze Age literate peasants before we knew the earth.
You're not attacking at all. Go ahead. So you believe there's no God?
I don't even use the word believe. The point is
There is no God.
There's no need for God.
Is there God? Is there God? What would you say?
There's no evidence for God.
Okay,
There's no evidence for
so
God.
let me ask something. If there is no God, okay, if there is no thing called God, if he is nothing, can't something come from him?
As John Madden would say. Notice that Lawrence Krauss says that space, time, and matter can come into existence as long as you start with space, matter, and time. Well, that doesn't explain how the universe could come from nothing. Now, he says there's no evidence for God. What question might you ask somebody who says that? Well, you could ask, well, what evidence would you need to see to say there's a God? I mean, the universe is certainly a piece of evidence, it appears, for a being beyond the universe. And we'll see more evidence here in a minute. But actually, the question I might ask him or anybody who's an atheist is, why is there evidence for anything? Why is the universe so orderly that we can actually ascertain truths outside of our skull and come to conclusions that are valid about the cause and effect world outside of our skulls? It appears that this universe is orderly because it was put together and it's maintained, sustained by a mind. In fact, we'll see more of that here in a minute. And you could hear him under his breath. He said this in another context. He said, we celebrate there's no God. Why would you celebrate there's no God? In fact, he doesn't call himself an atheist. He calls himself an anti-theist, like his friend Christopher Hitchens. It's not that he just doesn't believe in God. It's that he doesn't want there to be a God. He's not open. That's why I'd ask him, if Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? The answer will be no. By the way, an atheist could ask a Christian, if atheism were true, would you become an atheist? Or if Islam was true, would you become a Muslim? Or if Buddhism was true, would you become a Buddhist? It's fair questions, right? Pascal said something pretty amazing at one point, many things. He said, people almost invariably base their beliefs not on the basis of proof, but on the basis of what they find attractive. Are we just believing something because we find it attractive? Either God or no God. God, I'm attractive because I'm going to have an afterlife. No God, I get to do what I want here. What's really true? That's the question. Now, one more argument in science, and that is the teleological argument, the design argument. And there's two aspects to this. The universe appears designed, and you appear designed. Life. Let's look at the universe first. In recent decades, scientists have discovered that the universe is fine-tuned. What do we mean by fine-tuned? There are certain factors, certain truths about our universe that if they were any different, these attributes, any different by just a hair's breadth, there would either be no universe or no universe that could support life. Let me just give you a couple of them. Stephen Hawking, again, an atheist, put it this way. He said if the expansion rate of the universe was different by 1 part in 1,000 million million, a second after the Big Bang, the universe would have collapsed back on itself or never developed galaxies. You change the expansion rate, that infinitesimal amount, we're not here. Now, you can't make any sort of evolutionary explanation for this. You can't say the expansion rate happened to evolve to this rate by chance, whatever that means. Why? Because it's not an expansion rate way down the road. This is an expansion rate from the inception of creation. Seems to me the same being that created space, matter, and time is the same being that fine-tuned the expansion rate to be precisely what it needed to be. In other words, this is an aspect of fine-tuning they call the initial conditions of the universe. If the initial conditions of the universe were slightly different, we wouldn't be here. If the gravitational force were altered by more than 1 part in 10 to the 40th power compared to the strong nuclear force, we wouldn't be here. What's 1 part in 10 to the 40th power? That's 1 part in 1 with 40 zeros following it. You say, Frank, I can't get my head around that number. I know, neither can I, so let me give you an illustration. Take the entire North American continent, from Central America all the way to Greenland. Stack it in dimes all the way up to the moon. That's about 230,000 miles. Then do that on 1 billion other North American continents. And then take that one big pile all together, mark 1 red dime in there, mix it all in, blindfold a friend, throw him in that one big pile. The chance that he would pick that 1 marked red dime is 1 chance in 10 to the 40th power. Is he going to pick that red dime? No. Look, there's only 2 reasons that value is where it is. It was either designed to be there or it wasn't. You say, maybe it happened by chance. Ladies and gentlemen, chance is not a cause. Who caused this? Chance, he was just here. No, chance is not a cause. Chance is a word we use to describe mathematical possibilities. Chance doesn't do anything. In fact, when scientists use the word chance, you know what they really mean? We don't know. Look, this was either designed or it wasn't. What makes the most sense? Somebody designed it there. Somebody put it right there. And these are just two of about a dozen of these parameters about our universe. Change any one of them, we're not here. It's as if there's a control room somewhere with a whole bunch of dials of the universe, and they're all set precisely to the right level. And if you went in there and turned one dial just a hair's breadth, the whole universe would go out of existence. Now, it's not just our universe that appears designed. Our solar system appears to be designed with us in mind. In fact, let's take a look at the solar system. Here we are, third rock from the sun. If we were just a little bit closer to or a little bit further away, we couldn't survive. A little bit closer to, we'd burn up. A little bit further away, we'd freeze. We are what scientists call the Goldilocks zone. It's not too hot. It's not too cold. It's a lie. It's way too hot here in the summer. The axial tilt, 23.5 degrees. Change that slightly, we don't exist. Earth rotation, 24 hours. Change that slightly, we don't exist. The size and distance of the moon from us, change that slightly, we don't exist. If Jupiter was not in its current orbit, we couldn't exist here on Earth. Why? What does Jupiter do for us? Jupiter is a cosmic vacuum cleaner. Its gravitational force is so strong that it attracts most of the meteors and space junk to it rather than us. In fact, if you take a close-up look at Jupiter, you know what these dark marks are? Those dark marks are comet fragment strikes that are bigger than the Earth. Thank God for Jupiter. Because if Jupiter wasn't there, we wouldn't be here. Saturn does the same thing. In fact, take a look at the planets here. In size, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Earth. Look at poor Pluto down here. You know, Pluto recently has been demoted as a planet. I don't know about you, I think it's size discrimination. And what if Pluto identifies as a planet? What then? You bigots. Take a look at this. You can hardly see Pluto. Take a look at this. All right, that's Arcturus. That's another star in our galaxy. Here's the sun. Jupiter is 1 pixel in size on this scale. Earth is invisible. Pluto, forget about it. All right, keep an eye on Arcturus now. Where's Arcturus now? Way over here. See it? Here's the sun. It's 1 pixel in size on this scale. Jupiter is invisible. Earth, Pluto, forget about them. In fact, if the Earth was the size of a golf ball, Betelgeuse here would be... Look, I don't name the stars, okay? If the Earth was the size of a golf ball, Betelgeuse would be 5 or 6 Empire State Buildings high. The heavens are awesome. And that's just in our galaxy. This is not outside our galaxy. This is inside our galaxy. And the average distance between stars in our galaxy is 30 trillion miles. And all that distance is necessary for us to exist here on Earth. Now, 30 trillion miles, how far is that? Far. Take you at least 2 tanks of gas in a Toyota Prius to go 30 trillion miles. A number of years ago, my wife and I took our 3 youngest sons, we have 3 sons, and they were young at the time is what I mean to say. We took them to Tucson, to the Desert Museum on the south side of Tucson. If you get to go to Tucson, Arizona, go over the hill, go to the Desert Museum out there, and if you go out to the museum on a clear night, you can see thousands of stars in the sky. So we were out there. This had to be like 25 years ago, maybe. And the guide said, it's so clear tonight that if we look up at 9:03, we will see the space shuttle in orbit. I said, we're not going to see the space shuttle in orbit. It's only 120 feet long. It's 350 miles up. We're not going to see it. Oh, me of little faith. At 9:03, the guide goes, look! And we look up in the sky, about 70 degrees above the horizon, there's an object streaking across the western desert sky relative to us about like this. I mean, it's really cooking. When it got right about here, it disappeared. I don't know whether Scotty beamed it up or what. Actually, what happened was, despite the fact that we were in total darkness, the space shuttle was so high up that the sun was still reflecting off of it. And when it got out of the range of the sun, we couldn't see it anymore. Now, when the space shuttle was in orbit, the space shuttle was traveling at about 18,000 miles an hour. That's 5 miles per second. You got trouble getting to school in the morning? Take the space shuttle. You'll be here. Imagine, 5 miles a second. Well, I did a little calculation to try and figure out how long would it take us if we could get in the space shuttle and go from our star, the sun, to another star, an average distance away in our galaxy, 30 trillion miles. In other words, how long would it take us to go 30 trillion miles if we could go 5 miles per second? How long would it take us? A long time. You must be a math major. Yeah. It would take us 201,450 years. That means if you got in the space shuttle at the time of Christ and started traveling from our star, the sun, to another star an average distance away inside our galaxy, you've been going 5 miles a second for 2,000 years, you would be less than 1/100th of the way there right now. And we're going to explore space. No, we're not. We're not going anywhere in space. We can hardly get out of our solar system. You know, it took us 9 years to get to Pluto. Imagine, our solar system, think of our solar system as a quarter. The center of the solar system, microscopic speck of dust, the sun. The outer rim of the quarter, Pluto. Where's the next nearest star? It's 2 football fields away. And it took us 9 years just to get to Pluto. We're not going anywhere in space. It's too far and it's too dangerous. But let's say we figure out light speed. Light speed would take us almost 4 years. Light speed, 186,000 miles per second, would take us almost 4 years to get to the next nearest star. Imagine if we figure that out and we go to another planetary system. In fact, what I'm about to show you is a little bit disturbing, but you're a mature audience, you can handle it. What happens if we get to another planetary system? We plant our flag, and then this happens. Beans are not for astronauts, ladies and gentlemen. To show you how analytical my wife is, I showed her that video for the first time, and she smiled just a little bit, and then she said, "That's illogical. There's no sound in space." Now, the psalmist says this, "As high as the heavens are above the earth, so great is his love for those who fear him." As high as the heavens are above the earth. How high are the heavens above the earth? If there's 30 trillion miles between stars in our galaxy, how many stars are there in the entire universe? Well, the Hubble Space Telescope helped us discover that. I don't know if you can see this on this screen, but you see along the bottom here, these are mountains down here. This is the southern hemisphere right here, the southern hemisphere. I'm going to show you a video that the NASA team put together after they did what is known as Hubble Ultra Deep Field. Hubble Ultra Deep Field. You can Google this. You can find this, public domain. Hubble Ultra Deep Field is when they trained the Hubble Space Telescope for about 11 days of exposure time on 1/26 millionth of the sky. What's 1/26 millionth of the sky? Go outside tonight, put a piece of rice on the end of your finger, hold it up at arm's length. That piece of rice represents about 1/26 millionth of the sky. So they did this, and what they found was shocking. I'm going to show you the video. There is no audio. It's just a bunch of pictures strung together. You're just going to see the video. And when I play this thing, the constellations are going to come up, and then Hubble is going to zoom out to that 1/26 millionth of the sky. You guys ready? Here we go. Hubble Ultra Deep Field. There are the constellations. Let's go see what Hubble found. They're screaming out there. What you're looking at are nearly 10,000 galaxies, each with billions of stars of their own in 1/26 millionth of the sky. Now, how many stars are there in the entire universe? The number of stars in the entire universe are about equivalent to the number of grains of sand on all the beaches, on all the earth, times 100,000. And to go from one star to another star, going 5 miles a second, will take you over 200,000 years just in our galaxy. Now you know what the Bible means when it says the heavens declare the glory of God. Why does he say look to the heavens? Because everything in our physical experience is limited. The closest thing to infinity, and the heavens are still not infinite, but the closest thing to infinity are the heavens. Because when you look up and you see stars equivalent to sand grains on 100,000 Earths, and it'll take you over 200,000 years to go between those stars at 5 miles a second, you get an idea of the nature of God. In fact, I only gave you half the verse a minute ago. Here's the rest of it. For as high as the heavens are above the earth, so great is his love for those who fear him. As far as the east is from the west, so far as he removed our transgressions from us. As high as the heavens are above the earth, stars on 100,000 earths, sand grains on 100,000 earths. And he's removed our transgressions. How? Look, if the heavens represent the nature of God, that means he's infinitely just. That's a problem. Because none of us have been perfectly just. So if he's infinitely just, he has to give us justice. He has to punish us. But he doesn't want to give us justice. He wants to give us love. So what does he do? If he's going to remain infinitely just, he has to find an innocent substitute who hasn't sinned himself to punish that person instead of us. He can't find any one of us to do it because we have to pay for our own sins. So who does he find? He finds himself. He comes to earth, adds humanity to his deity, allows the creatures that rebelled against him to beat, torture, and kill him so he could take our punishment upon himself. That's how he can separate our sins as far as the east is from the west. Christianity is not another religion. Christianity is not trying to do good to make yourself better with God. Christianity is God does it all. And all you do is trust in what he's done. Now, when you look at stars equivalent to sand grains on 100,000 earths, does that make you feel insignificant? It shouldn't. Why? Because the heavens aren't made in the image of God, but you are. In fact, this is you in the womb at 11 weeks. Question, is this animal, mineral, vegetable, or human? Human. In fact, let's go back even further than 11 weeks. Let's go all the way back to when your mother and your father got together to conceive you. Have you guys had this talk before? I see some young people in here, so I'll try and be discreet. I also see some older people in here, so I'll try and be discreet as well, just in case you've forgotten how this works. When your mother and your father got together to conceive you, your mother unconsciously perfumed her egg to attract your father, and then your father sent the entire population of the United States, 300 million soldiers, toward your mother's egg. And then there was a race. And you won. That's right. Don't let anyone ever tell you you're not special. You beat out 300 million others. You have blown away anything Michael Phelps has done. In fact, seeing some of you limp in here earlier makes it hard for me to believe you were the fastest soldier in the gene pool, but you were. Now, your soldier was 20 to 30 times smaller than a grain of salt, yet it contained half of the 3.2 billion letter software program we call your genome, all the letters in the right order, that makes you you. And your mother's egg was about the size of a period at the end of a sentence in an average book, and it contained the other half of the 3.2 billion letter software program, your genome, your DNA, all the letters in the right order. And when your soldier and your egg came together, a new 100% genetic human being was created. You know, you have not received any more genetic information from this point till right now. Your genetic information has just duplicated itself. In fact, there were only 4 things separating you from adulthood: time, air, water, and food. Those are the same 4 things that separate a 2-year-old from adulthood. Does this have implications on the abortion issue? Yeah, I think it does. We don't kill the 2-year-old. Why do we kill the unborn child in the womb? Genetically, it's the same. You say, wait a minute, Frank, you can't legislate morality. All right, no extra charge for this, ladies and gentlemen. All laws legislate morality. Every law declares one behavior right and the opposite behavior wrong. You can't think of a law that doesn't legislate morality. And when people say, don't impose your morality on me, you ought to say, why not? Would that be immoral? Because you know what you're doing? You're imposing your morality on me right now. You're saying I ought not impose ought nots, and yet you're imposing that ought not on me. Actually, the better answer is this. When somebody says, don't impose your morality on me, or don't impose your morals on me, I always say, these aren't my morals. I didn't make this stuff up. I didn't make up the fact that murder's wrong, that rape is wrong, that abortion's wrong, that theft is wrong, that men were made for women and women were made for men, and the best way to perpetuate and stabilize society, which is the reason the government's involved in marriage to begin with, is to legally recognize that man-woman relationship over every other relationship. I didn't make any of this stuff up. This isn't my morality. This isn't your morality. This just happens to be the morality. The one Thomas Jefferson said was self-evident. Now, some people don't like that morality, and if you've got a problem with that morality, you don't have a problem with me. I didn't make it up. You have a problem with the Creator upon whose nature this morality is derived. All right, no extra charge for that. Let's go back to this. From this point till right now, a construction project of astonishing complexity began taking place inside of you. Cells began multiplying at a rate of 4,000 cells per second. Brain cells began multiplying at a rate of 100,000 cells per second. For most of you, anyway. Some cells became brain cells, others heart cells, others lung cells. How did they know how to do this? Nobody knows. Some cells went so far across you to become what they needed to become that it would be equivalent to you today walking across the United States alone. And that construction project continues to this very moment. You just made 4 million new red blood cells. You just made another 4 million new red blood cells. You just made another 4. Knock it off. I mean, are you thinking about this? Are you concentrating? Are you going, wait a minute, Frank, time out. I got to concentrate. New red blood cells coming up. No, this is just happening. How is it happening? Aristotle noticed something 2,400 years ago. Oh, he didn't know anything about blood cells, but he did notice that all of nature's going in a direction. In fact, think about it this way. He said, why does an acorn, if it's properly nourished, always go in the direction of becoming an oak tree? Why doesn't it become an elm tree or a birch tree or a seahorse? You say, well, it's programmed to become an oak tree. Well, who programmed it? And by the way, is an acorn conscious? Is an acorn in the ground going, all right, what do I have to do to become an oak tree? No. But it reliably goes in a direction of becoming an oak tree. If it doesn't have a mind of its own, yet it reliably goes in a direction, there must be an external mind directing it toward that end. That's what Aristotle called the unmoved mover. He said, look, even if the universe is eternal, you need an unmoved mover. You need somebody who's keeping all of this going. Thomas Aquinas came along in the 1200s AD and he said, this is going to be my fifth way to argue for God, that all of nature's going in a direction. If it's going in a direction, there must be a mind behind it. There must be a director of some kind behind it. Now notice, this is not an argument for a God way back, Big Bang God way back here. Aristotle mistakenly thought the universe was eternal, but he's saying, even if it is eternal, you need a being every single second to keep everything going the way it's going. You need a cause, a vertical cause, not just a horizontal cause way back here. This is a sustaining cause. In fact, God is to the universe what a band is to music. If a band were up here playing music, the band would be creating and sustaining the music. What would happen to the music the second the band stopped playing? Music would be over. Same thing is true with God. God creates the universe, and he creates you, and he creates the natural laws that keep it going, and he sustains the universe, and he sustains you, and he sustains the natural laws that keep it going. This is why the Apostle Paul said, in him we live and move and have our being. And Christ holds all things together. And the writer of Hebrews says that God sustains all things by his powerful word. This is a cause right now. Now, there's a lot more in the book Stealing from God on that, but we got to move to our final argument before we get to your questions. And the final argument might be the most relevant argument of all to many people today, and that is morality. And some of you may have heard of our ministry, crossexamine.org, before you came here. If you have, you probably heard about it because of this man right here. His name is Jorge Gil. He is one of the top apologists in the world in Spanish, but relax, he's going to do it in English. All right? Jorge Gil is going to talk about the moral argument because he had something that was absolutely shocking happen in his life that makes this argument very personal. So here he is. Give a hand to Jorge Gil, ladies and gentlemen. Go, brother. You got it.
Unmuted, it was my fault. All right, let's do it. So as Frank says, this is the argument that we all know from elementary school since we were little. And really, it's not something that is controversial in experience, but maybe up here we don't get it. And it's pretty much like this. Objective moral values and duties exist. A lot of us think that morality is subjective. I've been looking at the whole presentation. I realized that a lot of people, when that statement came up, kind of got a little wrinkled, right, in the face. So I'm just going to try to give you a philosophical argument for this point, and then we're going to try to unpack it. Premise number one, if God does not exist, objective moral values and duties do not exist. That is not a controversial premise. We can all agree there. Premise number two is objective moral values and duties do exist. That's where most people have issues. But hopefully by the end of my short segment, we all agree that that's the case. Now, therefore, we can conclude that God exists. And here is a bit of my story. September 4, 2014, I'm in my office. I used to work in Newton Grove here in North Carolina. I used to sell used vehicles. It's 9:43. I get a phone call from my sister calling me from Costa Rica. And she's nervous, and she says, Jorge, I was talking to your Aunt Shirley. All of a sudden, she got real nervous. She is screaming and telling me, he's coming, he's coming. And all of a sudden, I just hear a loud bang and silence. So can you try to call her? Can you try to call the lady where she works to see if she's okay? So I said, Rosie, calm down. I'll try to call her, and I'll call the police to see what's happening. So I pick up the phone. It rings, and goes to voicemail. Call again, same thing. Call 911. I tell them something must have happened. Give them the address. And then I called the lady, the owner of the house. I said, don't go to your house. Call your husband, call your kids. Make sure you guys stay away. I'm on my way. I get in the car. I hop on I-40. It's about a 25-minute ride going about 100 miles an hour. 5 minutes, as soon as I hit the highway, the phone rings. And it's my uncle. Pick up the phone and I said, hey, Carmelo, how you doing? He said, hey, man, I'm fine. How about you? I said, how can I help you? He said, well, I just shot your aunt through the heart. And I'm calling you to let you know that I'm going to hang myself in your backyard so you can tell the police where to find me. Have a good day. And he hangs up the phone. So now, ladies and gentlemen, I submit to you that if God does not exist, I might not like what he did to my aunt. Maybe you don't like what he did to my aunt. But if morality is subjective, and there is not an objective standard for morality, then that's my opinion against my uncle's opinion. If God does not exist and we don't have a transcendent standard of justice, all moral claims, all claims of injustice are boiled down to mere personal opinion. As you can see, this is the TV report. I had to go and identify the bodies. I was in the middle of it. But if God does not exist, then anything is permissible. Because who's to say that your opinion is better than mine? How do you adjudicate between right and wrong? Honestly, it was so difficult for me because I had not only lost my aunt, but it was the only person that I had a direct relationship here in the United States. I moved from Costa Rica a few years before this. I had to tell my children who were in school. Actually, the schools were locked down because my uncle was my babysitter. And the schools had to be locked down. I had to pick my kids, you can see them there, and tell them that their aunt, the only grandma figure that they had, was gone at the hands of a man that they loved. Ladies and gentlemen, I submit to you that if God doesn't exist, then you cannot truly condemn evil actions like that. Now, I've seen there's some kids in the auditorium. Maybe you want to look away because I'm about to show you something gruesome. Maybe if you don't want to see it, you might want to look away. If God doesn't exist, can you truly, objectively, and absolutely condemn what you're seeing? Is this what we're seeing inhuman? Absolutely not. This is what humans do. This is what we have been doing for a very long time. As humans, we usually treat ourselves this way. But if God doesn't exist, if there's not a standard of justice outside of ourselves, then you might not like it, but you cannot truly condemn it. C.S. Lewis have a beautiful way to put things together when he writes. In one of his books, he said the following. He said, as an atheist, my argument against God was that the universe seemed so cruel and unjust, but how had I got this idea of just and unjust? A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. What was I comparing this universe with when I called it unjust? What is he trying to say? He's saying that really, In order for evil to truly exist, good must be real and truly exist. And in order for good to truly exist, God must exist. You might ask yourself, why? Because God is the standard of goodness. His nature is the standard of goodness. And you say, well, that's just philosophical mumbo jumbo. That's just an assertion. And I'm going to tell you that a lot of philosophical statements are way more certain than scientific ones. Let's look at, for example, the atom. There are several models. There are about 4 or 5, and scientists continue to learn, and the model of the atom continue to evolve. And there are discrepancies and differences and papers written about the models. But if I tell you that raping a baby for fun is absolutely immoral, is objectively wrong, I hope that you agree with me. Actually, let's kick it up a notch. What if there is a person who is racially motivated raping black and brown babies out there? Is that immoral? We know the evil is real. We all are affected by evil. But evil actually shows that God exists, not the other way around. Because the shadows prove the sunshine. The fact that there are shadows, it shows us that there's sunshine out there. In the same way that the fact that evil truly exists shows that good really exists. And for good to exist, we must have a transcendent standard of goodness. And that's exactly what we call God. We're not saying that this is the God of the Bible yet, but it's the concept that must have a reality in order for any opinion that you have about baby killing or baby raping or stealing, for that to be wrong. Actually, since God's nature is perfect, when we talk about good and bad in moral terms, when we're saying that something is evil or bad morally, that's moving away from that standard. And when we say that something is good, is that something moving towards that standard. Let's talk about murder, since we are on the topic. The statement, "You ought not murder." Ladies and gentlemen, if God doesn't exist, or maybe that there is a force out there that pull everything together, still don't give us morality. But you cannot get an ought from an is. If God doesn't exist and we're the product of time plus chance and matter plus matter, you cannot get real morality. Something that is absolutely binding on all of us. And we live that way. There's not a way that you cannot live in such a way. It seems that there are moral law out there. And if there is a moral law, then it means that it must be a moral lawgiver. Because you only have moral obligations to persons, not to things. I'm not morally obligated to put gas in my car. Now, if I don't do that, I won't get anywhere. But I'm not morally obligated to do that. So as you can see, premise number 2 makes a lot of sense. And if premise number 2 makes a lot of sense, then we can conclude that God exists. Again, we haven't gotten to the God of the Bible yet. But it's very hard to walk away from this and say that this argument doesn't stand. If God exists, then one day my aunt will get justice. Either way, whether my uncle repented in the last minute, she will get justice. Because Jesus took that sin upon himself. And if he didn't, the same. If my uncle didn't repent, he will get justice one day. Thank you.
We're just going to summarize what we've been through here and then take your questions. So take a look at what we've seen so far from these three arguments. From the cosmological argument, we can see we have a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, intelligent cause. From the teleological argument, we can also see, in addition to being intelligent, this being keeps things going. He's sustaining the universe. And from the argument that Jorge just gave, the moral argument, we can also see that this being is moral. His standard is good. So we have a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, intelligent, moral creator who created and sustains all things. And we haven't opened the Bible yet. In fact, how do we know that God exists? If someone were to ever ask you that question, you should say, if you do believe that God exists, I know God by his effects. If there's a creation, that's the effect. I'm reasoning back to a cause, a creator. If there's a design, that's the effect. I'm reasoning back to a cause, a designer. If I have a moral law written on my heart, that's the effect. I'm reasoning back to a moral lawgiver. If I have the ability to reason and understand what's out there, and the universe appears orderly, that's the effect. I'm reasoning back to a mind. This is what scientists do. They reason from effect back to cause. If you're going to deny the law of causality, then you have to give up on all science too. So, you might say, well, atheists have arguments against this. They may, but they're not good. In fact, I can't say anything better than C.S. Lewis, so I'm just going to show you what he said. Most atheists today are materialists. They don't think there's any soul, there's just a body. No mind, just a brain. You're just a molecular machine. Everything you do is driven by the laws of physics. You may think you have free will, but you don't. You're just a moist robot, according to atheists today, materialists. Here is what Lewis says about this. It's a 2-slide quote. Check this out. Suppose there were no intelligence behind the universe. In that case, nobody designed my brain for the purpose of thinking. Thought is merely the byproduct of some atoms within my skull, but if so, how can I trust my own thinking to be true? But if I can't trust my own thinking, of course I can't trust the arguments leading to atheism and therefore have no reason to be an atheist or anything else. Unless I believe in God, I can't believe in thought, so I can never use thought to disbelieve in God. Boom. You can't say it better than Lewis. So, we've got attributes for what appear to be a theistic God, but how do we know it's the Christian God? We're not going to be able to complete this tonight, but let me just say one quick thing about our miracles possible. What is the greatest miracle in the Bible? It's not the resurrection. The greatest miracle in the Bible is the first verse. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. If that verse is true, every other verse is at least possible. Well, ladies and gentlemen, even atheists are admitting the evidence that the first verse is indeed actually true. They think, some people say miracles are impossible, but they're not impossible. Why? Because the first verse has actually occurred. Not just Noah, not just the resurrection, not just Jonah. Those are easy compared to the greatest miracle of all. If Genesis 1:1 is true, every other verse is at least possible. And even the atheists are admitting the evidence that shows that the universe had a beginning. They don't think it's God, but what else could it be? And if he can create the universe out of nothing, can he do any of these other miracles? Of course he can. The only question is, has he done any more? And we'll have to come back at a later date to do that and get to, is the New Testament true? Now, we went through a lot of material here. I want to give it all to you for free. All you need to do is to text the word evidence to 855-909-0582. 855-909-0582. If you do that, I'm going to send you this entire PowerPoint presentation. Let's see. Jorge and I showed you about 92 slides. The whole presentation has 362 slides. Okay? And I'm going to give it to you for free in a PDF format. Just text that word evidence to that phone number. And then if you want to go further, on the book table, we have the I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist book. We have the DVD set, which goes through all of this over 7 hours. You can get curriculum workbooks that go with it. There's a brand new book called Hollywood Heroes, How Your Favorite Movies Reveal God. My son and I, who's also a seminary grad, went through some of the biggest blockbusters of the past few decades, like Iron Man, Harry Potter, yeah, you'd be amazed, Captain America, Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, what else have in there? Batman, Wonder Woman, Spider-Man, Superman, these kind of movies, they're all borrowing from the greatest story ever told. So if you have a young person in particular, even an old person that likes movies, you want to get them more interested in Christianity, get that book. It's on the table. Makes a great Christmas gift. By the way, all the proceeds from the sale of the books and the DVDs will go to feed needy children. Mine. Okay? Just so you know. I got 3 sons, so I need some help. Now, we're going to go to questions right now, but before we do, Reagan, where are you, Reagan? Reagan, are you in here? There she is. I want you to, we don't want you to just come in here and present this and you go, okay, yeah, so what? If you're on this campus and you want to go further into this material and learn more about it and get with other like-minded people, or even if you're not like-minded, even if you just want to ask questions and push back a little bit, we want to give you an opportunity to do that. And Reagan is going to tell you where you can do it and when. So let me see. There you go. Yeah, go ahead.
Hello?
There you go.
Sorry. Okay. Hey, I'm Reagan. So after, like I said earlier, there's a table out in the foyer area that I'll be standing there and so will Dr. Plummer. So if you have any interest in ratio or seeing when meetings are, just anything like that, stop by, say hi. We're nice people. But yeah, so if you have any questions or anything, we'll be out there. Our next meeting is scheduled for the 14th of November in the Smith Science Building at 7 o'clock. So, thanks.
Question, you have to come up to the microphone because this is being live streamed. Of course, when you come up to the microphone, you're going to be on the internet. You're giving your consent. If you don't want to do that, then don't come up and ask a question. But here it is. And the great Jorge Gil is going to come out here as well. And no one likes to ask the first question, so we're going to move right on to the second question. Second question right now. And if you would, after the first person gets up, just line up behind that person so we don't have to wait for the person to sit down and then you come down. So let's just jump right into questions. Anyone? We got to go up to the microphone, if you don't mind. Questions? It's right over here. Right over here, someone. He's trying to get out. All right, since we talked a lot about science, so one atom said to another atom, I just lost an electron, and the second said to the first, are you sure? And the first said, I'm positive. That's my science dad joke. Yes, sir, what's your name? Charles, go ahead. Is that on? There you go. Yeah. Yes.
My first one was the slide when you're talking about creation, atheistic versus theistic, right? You said that the theistic view is that someone created something, right? Mm-hmm. But then my question would be who created that something?
Yeah, excellent question.
Because then that could lead to nothing created that someone that
right.
created something.
Well, we would agree that there has to be an uncaused first cause. There has to be something that has always existed, otherwise nothing would exist. Right. So either the universe has always existed or something that transcends the universe. Now think about what we've discovered here so far. If space, matter, and time had a beginning, that would mean the cause has to be spaceless, timeless. If you're timeless, do you have a beginning?
No, so would that be considered nothing, though?
No, that wouldn't be considered nothing. It would be an immaterial, timeless, powerful cause, a being immaterial being that we would call God. So if you're timeless, you don't have a beginning, which means you don't have a cause. So who created God? Nobody. He's the uncreated creator. He's the unmoved mover. He is the being that didn't have a beginning, because you can't go on an infinite regress of causes. You're right. You got to start somewhere, and that would be what we mean by God.
So then would you say God is nothing or something?
God is something, but he's not made of molecules. I mean, you can think of things that are not made of molecules that exist, right?
I don't know anything off the top of my head.
Well, like say the laws of logic or the laws of mathematics or the law you ought not murder, right? It exists, but it's not a physical thing.
I guess, but isn't math just like manifestation of what's already there? Like it's a representation of things that exist.
Well, it describes things, but math itself is not a thing. It's not a physical thing, right? There are laws about how things work, but the laws of mathematics are not physical, just like the laws of logic are not physical. The laws of morality aren't physical either. Justice isn't physical.
Right. Okay.
Does that make sense?
I guess. So you're considering math like nothing?
No, it's something.
It's something.
When we say nothing, we don't mean necessarily just non-physical. If it's non-physical, yeah, we're not saying it's nothing if it's non-physical. We're saying that there are things that are non-physical that are something. They're just not made of physical properties. They don't have physical properties. They're not extended in space.
Okay. Okay, and then you made a good point, right, when you said you're dispelling science because science is just made by scientists, right? So you can't consider that all true. But then my question would be like, couldn't you just flip that back on the Bible? Because the Bible was also written by humans.
No, I'm not saying all science is false. All I'm saying is that science requires scientists in order to exist. If there were no scientists, you wouldn't have science. So people have to interpret the data they're seeing, just like you have to interpret the Bible too.
So then
it still exists, but the question is the scientist interpreting the data properly? That's the question.
So then would you say that like Christianity or the Bible couldn't exist if there weren't humans to interpret it?
Well, if there were no humans, there would be no Christianity, because Christianity involves God coming to earth to save humans, yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead.
And even in the sense, like, the elements that we study to do science, to find the relationship between cause and effects are there, right? But scientists need to interpret that. For example, if we're going to look at Christianity and the Bible in a parallel way, men still have to interpret, the biblical text. But you will not dismiss that just because men are interpreting the text. In other words, you still have to engage in interpretation. The question is, the million-dollar question is, are you making the right interpretation? That's why we have to be careful thinkers. And Charles, that's why I love people like you that are inquisitive when it comes to things like this, because what is it? Socrates says the unexamined life is not worth living. We have to do that. We have to engage in conversation about things that make us uncomfortable. It makes us think. And for the God question, look for a terminology of aseity, with self-existence. Is very, very fun to look into stuff like that. Aseity.
Okay, aseity. And then when you said that it's up for us to interpret what Christianity or what the Bible is saying, right? Then another question would be like, who gets to determine what the interpretation is, and how do we agree on what's right if it's an interpretation? That sounds like an opinion. Well,
that is true. There are methodologies, right? But at the end of the day, there are rules and methodologies for you to engage in biblical interpretation. Same thing that there are methodologies for you to engage in the scientific enterprise. But what you need to understand is it has to be a careful study, and also how honest is the person who is looking at this data. So it combines the areas of careful reasoning, logic, clear thinking, and honesty. It really, at the end of the day, what corresponds to reality is what is true. So,
yeah, most of the big things that the Bible talks about are not controversial. There is a God, we are not him, we've sinned, Jesus came, died, lived a perfect life, died, and by trusting in him, we can have our sins forgiven. We're saved because of what he's done, not anything we've done. So the main things are the plain things, but there are finer points of theology that Christians argue over.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So just like there are obvious things in science, you put 2 parts hydrogen, 1 part oxygen together, you get water. It's not controversial, right? But we may argue over the quantum level, right? We may argue over things we're not too sure about, but on the big issues, many of them are settled. Make sense?
Yeah, solid. Okay. That was it.
Thank you, Charles.
Appreciate it. Yes, sir.
All right, so
What's your name?
Thomas.
Hey, Thomas, go ahead.
All right, so my question is, because I'm a relatively new Christian, I'm a baby Christian, a year and a half. So, in like the New Testament, specifically Acts and afterwards, you see the disciples performing miracles, healing the sick and on all of that, right? Do you think that the reason we don't see that today is a failure of the church?
Well, when we look at the scriptures, once you get familiar with the Bible, which is a wonderful thing, it's a beautiful thing to go into the scriptures and to see the person of Jesus kind of permeate through the whole work. You start realizing the miracles really didn't happen that often in the Bible. If you take the whole body of scripture, and you lay it out in the 1600 years that it took for this event that we have in the scriptures, a miracle happened around every 8 to 10 years. But if you look closer, miracles happen around prophets, around people, around events that brought new revelation. So miracles were sort of like God's seal of approval that the person that was bringing the message was legit. It came from him. Now, when you look in the New Testament, especially in the book of Acts, when you have Paul and Peter and all these miracles around them, you start to see that this was to consolidate that message. They're in their different positions. There are people that believe they're cessationists, meaning that they said, hey, once the canon was closed, meaning the scriptures were closed, there was no need for this kind of miracles to happen anymore. But also there are people that they're continuous to say, no, those miracles are still happening today. I kind of fall in the middle. Right? I say, no, God has the prerogative to still continue to do this, but it's his choice to imbue with somebody with that kind of power for a particular thing. Now, if you notice, one of the miracles that we have here in the United States, I'm from Costa Rica, is the medical advances that we have. So you don't see a lot of miracles happening in terms of healing because we have a healthcare system that allows us to heal people through, the scientific developments. But if you look in places like the Middle East and Africa, miracles are happening. And they're happening in places where the gospel is spreading. And in the Muslim world, Muslims are having dreams and are seeing things, are seeing visions where Jesus showed up and they are flocking to Christianity. So we see that as God's seal that his message is true. Now, has the church failed in many areas? Absolutely. We're in the mess that we're in. If the church would act like the church, we wouldn't be where we are, right? But if you look at, for example, I travel all around Latin America, and we see both sides. The churches that don't believe in miracles and they're closed and they're very dogmatic about certain things, and the churches where everything is a miracle, right? Where sparkle gold comes out of the vents, right? So we have to be able to find a middle, and that's what, for example, Thomas Aquinas always look at both sides and try to be in the middle. So I don't think it's a failure of the church. Does God have power? Do Christians have power? Actually, we are the temple of God. When we think about that, we think about all these evil forces if we believe in the supernatural, and we say, oh, that's scary. No, it's the other way around. If we are the church, if we are the temple of God, if we are imagers, everywhere we step foot is sacred space. It's the other side that should be afraid of us. So we need to be bold. Now, I'm not saying that God is going to give you the ability to do miracles tomorrow, but if there is a need, He will see with His wisdom who He's going to use for that. But it's not something that you say. Actually, we see people in the Bible saying, hey, I want to buy that power you have. So we have to be careful to do that nowadays.
Well, I don't necessarily not believe in miracles.
Right.
Like, I am, the only reason I'm a Christian is the product of a miracle.
Right.
I survived a pretty devastating wreck unharmed.
Wow.
So it's not that I don't believe in miracles. I just was more so wondering if the lack of, the healings and whatnot.
Well, remember, miracles have to be rare if they're going to get our attention, though, right? If they happened all the time, they wouldn't be miracles.
No.
They wouldn't be acts of God that go, oh, this points to God. Like, for example, if people rose from the dead routinely, what would the resurrection of Christ mean to us? Nothing. You go to somebody, hey, Jesus rose from the dead to prove He was God. And you go, so what? Uncle George just rose from the dead 2 weeks ago. Now I got to give the inheritance back. No, it's got to be a rare event.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me recommend a book, Thomas, so we can go to some other questions. And that is, there's 2 books you can get that are good on this. Any book by Craig Keener, Keener, or Lee Strobel wrote a book a few years ago called The Case for Miracles. The Case for Miracles.
I've actually read The Case for Christ.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, same guy.
Yeah.
Check it out.
All
right, thank you.
Thank you, Thomas.
Yes, sir.
How's it going, Frank? My name's Connor.
Connor?
I had Connor. Yeah, I had a question. So why would God create a being if they were meant to go to hell?
If they were what?
Why would God create a being if they were meant to just go to hell? So a lot of people argue that Judas Iscariot, whenever he betrayed Jesus and then he went and hanged himself, a lot of people argue that he was just meant for hell.
Okay. Why did God create people He knew would go to hell? Well, the point here is that no matter what universe God creates, He knows how it's going to turn out, right? Because He's all-knowing. So people might say, well, why didn't God create a universe where everyone believed then? Why does He have to create a universe where some people don't believe? Well, just because it's logically possible that God could create a universe where everyone believes doesn't mean it's actually achievable. Because even though God is all-powerful, He can't force free creatures to do what He wants, otherwise they wouldn't be free. So any universe God creates is going to have some people that don't trust in Him. But does that require God to create nothing because some people freely choose to reject Him? I don't think so. I think God can still create a universe where people don't, or some people reject Him, but some people love Him, and He can get His will done, and either people get justice or they get grace, one of the two. And even people who don't do God's will by trusting in Him can still get some of God's work done. Let me give you an example. Richard Dawkins, very popular atheist, writes a book called The God Delusion. Christian picks it up and reads it and goes, wow, there's an argument here against God. I better investigate this. So as a result of reading an atheist book, a Christian is getting closer to God by investigating what the atheist has said. Here's a situation where someone who is doing something against God actually turns out to be a positive for this person. So God can get His will done even through all of us. I mean, it's been said this way, that God can draw a straight line with a crooked stick, and we're all crooked sticks. So the bottom line to the question is, people go to hell because they freely decide, first of all, they sin, and then they freely decide not to accept the pardon. And what they get is justice, and people who do accept what Christ has done get grace. So nobody's treated unfairly. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. An instance I kind of use sometimes is what did Judas do after he betrayed Jesus? He went out and hanged himself, and another one it says he fell on his face. and he died. And then Peter, whenever he denied Jesus 3 times, whenever the cock crew, he went and wept bitterly, and he repented from his sins rather than choosing to end his life. So that would be kind of an argument I would use. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Connor. Appreciate it. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. What's your name?
My name's Trent. I wanted to thank you, Frank and Jorge, for all the work you do in the defense of the Christian faith and for coming here tonight
Thank you, sir.
to propose this. My question is related to the age of the universe. Lots of different theories out there about whether young Earth, old Earth. So my question will be, according to the scriptures, Exodus 21:10 speaks of a 6-day creation, and how would you respond to that from an old Earth perspective?
I'm absolutely convinced the universe is at least 60 years old.
Nice.
I'll throw my mom in there. It's at least 84. Okay? With regard to the age of the universe, Christians argue over this, but the point here about God rested on the 7th day, right? Well, God is still at rest. The 7th day is longer than the other days because he's still at rest. So if the 7th day is longer than 24 hours, maybe the other days are too. And when I look at Genesis 1, I see the first verse which says, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. So when did God create the heavens and the earth? In the beginning. Does it say when the beginning was? No, it just says there was a beginning. You say, what about the days? Well, the days begin in verse 3, and there's a rhythm to it, almost a poetic rhythm. And God said, right? And God said. We don't know if the heavens, if the first verse of the Bible is a description of the heavens and the earth being created. We don't know is that a summary statement of what he's about to tell us? Or are the heavens and the earth created and then God is just going back and saying, well, here's how I did it? We're not exactly sure. But it seems to me that you could say that the Bible leaves the age of the universe indeterminate. Because the heavens and the earth are created before the days begin. And even if you think the days have something to do with the age, the 7th day is longer than 24 hours. So who's to say the other days aren't longer? The best evidence I've seen lately is the fact that the creation account in Genesis 1 is a polemic, meaning an argument against the Egyptian creation story. Why? We always have to transport ourselves back to when the book was written.
Correct.
The people who Moses is written to have just come out of Egypt. They've been there for 400 years. When they're walking through the desert, they're not going, I wonder how old this place is. I mean, that's not their question, right? Their question is, are the Egyptian gods the true gods, or is Yahweh the true God? Now, in the Egyptian creation story, somehow these Egyptian gods just already exist somehow, and they have to fight one another to bring order to chaos. In the Bible, the creation story is God doesn't fight anyone. And God's not inside the universe. God's outside the universe. He just speaks and brings order to chaos. So it's a polemic, it seems, against the Egyptian creation story. So I don't think, look, it's perfectly fine to interpret it as a young earth, but I don't think it's necessary to interpret it as a young earth. And I think there's other evidence that suggests it's much older.
Yeah, my answer would have been way quicker. I just said
Let's not get into young earth, old earth. Just make it an adolescent earth right in the middle, and you're good to go.
I think it's very important, like you said, Frank, about using the term beginning, and even as we look further on into the New Testament, specifically in the Gospels, we see references of in the beginning when God made man and woman. I think it's Mark 10 speaks to that, which is another reference to one of the other days of creation and it being at the beginning of time, which obviously I don't think I have to state it, but with my stance being the earth being young, but just wanted to get you all's, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say one thing that we have to remember always, that these are an in-house issue. This is not something that we should blow up in a way that is going to become a stumbling block for other people, especially those who are seeking, right?
Yep.
And that whether you're old earth or young earth, we're still brothers.
Yes.
This is not a salvific issue. And I think a lot of people will see us quarreling about this and be turned off by it. right? So we have to be very careful when we talk about these issues out in public. Not saying that it's not fun. It's a lot of fun, right? And it is super interesting, but it is also something that at the end of the day, God is not going to ask you, hey, what do you believe? Are you old earth or you young earth? And it's going to keep you outside because of it.
But don't listen to him. He's a heretic. Thank you.
Thank you all.
All right. Yes, sir. What's your name?
My name's Bryce Holloway.
Bryce, come on a little closer to the mic if you would.
Yeah, my name's Bryce Holloway.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
I just want to shout out my friend Jack back there.
All right, Jack.
We drove all the way here from High Point University, and we really appreciate
the great university, High Point. Yeah, thank you.
Woo. We really appreciate your work, and we thank you for coming here and stuff and answering our questions.
Thank you.
So I guess my question is more of like a theological question.
Yeah.
I just want to get your opinion on it.
Sure.
So like if the God that you've described here is the true God, like the God of the Bible, he's all-powerful, all-knowing, perfect, moral, holy. What is your view as far as like how he, well not how he, but like on like free will? Or so like if the Bible says like we are dead in our sins and transgressions and like no man is good, no not one, like for all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. Like how, I don't know, do you?
He is predestined to answer this.
Okay, yeah.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
So when we look at this terminology in the Bible, there are different camps, theologically speaking, as you said, this is a theological question. That some says they're hard determinists, right? That God is sort of like the puppet master, and then you have the other ones who, hold to libertarian free will and even open theism, but God don't even know the future. You got to strike a balance. When we look at the Bible, we look at the whole body of scriptures. We don't just go to one verse or another verse to see what happened. And if we look in the scriptures, we see that even predestination doesn't mean things like salvation, or means that something that if you're predestined, doesn't mean that you're going to be saved. And let me tell you, Israelites, and remember, and this is something that Frank just said, when you read the Bible, when you read the Old Testament, you got to have the ancient Israelite living in your head. And when you're reading the New Testament, you got to have that first century Christian living in your head, because you need that context. And it's not only the verse in front and the verse behind, or what kind of genre is the book, but actually the cultural context of what they had in their heads at that time. But you look at several scriptures and you realize, for example, David, they're coming after him, and he goes and he asks God, if they, if I stay, will they give me up? And God said yes. And what he does? Leaves, right? So God knew, right, that if he stayed, they were going to give him up and they were going to kill him, because Saul was going to kill him. And what happened? David did otherwise and moved away. Even though God knew what was going to happen, doesn't mean that ended up happening. So there is a balance between human actions and God's omniscience, right? And Frank uses the example of the football game. Now, because I don't like football, I'm going to use the example of a soccer game, right? Imagine
you're going to put this American audience to sleep.
Okay. So
we need more points.
Yeah. Okay. So what happened is, let's say that you're a soccer fan, right? And you're somewhere working or you're studying, so you're just going to watch the replay on the way home. Somebody ring you up and say, you saw that so-and-so won, and you're like, oh man, you just spoiled it for me. I was heading home to watch it, right? When you get home and you watch the game, even though you know what the outcome is going to be, are you infringing upon the free wills of the players that you're watching? No. Why? Because you're outside of time. When you're looking at that soccer match, it already happened, right? In the same way, God can look, and remember, God is outside of time, so for him is an eternal present moment. Even though he knows the beginning from the end, that does not mean that he is actually moving you like a marionette, right? Because he can get his will done through free will creatures. He can create and that's what the Bible says. In the fullness of time is when Jesus came, meaning that everything was right for him to come. and he can use us. You were born for a moment such as this. He knows what's going to happen. He placed you, and things develop in the way that he sees fit. But it's not like he's moving you. Okay, now you turn to the left and you turn to the right. I think that both can be held in tension. And that is going to give you even a richer view of God, because if God is a puppet master, you know, then he's really not getting the glory, right? Because he's just making everybody do what he wants. But if he can get things done through sinners like you and me and get the glory, that is the God I want to worship.
Now, Bryce, my answer would be a lot shorter than his.
Okay.
If I was predestined to give a short answer. What he just said in one sentence is, knowledge does not imply causation. What do I mean by that? Because you know tomorrow the sun is going to come up in the east, are you causing it to come up in the east?
No.
No.
No, yeah,
right?
sorry, I said that.
Yeah, no. You're not causing it to come in. Because God knows that you're going to leave here in, say, 3 minutes, does that mean he's causing you to leave here in 3 minutes?
No. Yeah,
no,
okay.
Right? You're still operating freely, even though God knows what you're going to do. So he always knew Billy Graham would believe, and he always knew Richard Dawkins wouldn't believe. But they're freely believing and not believing.
Okay.
Make sense?
Yeah. Wait, can I ask one last question?
Yeah, go ahead. You're predestined to do one more. Go ahead.
Can you explain the Trinity?
Sure. Tomorrow.
Okay.
We're out of time. All right. Very, very short explanation of the Trinity. Explain it. It's not really about explaining it. It's about giving you a way of viewing the Trinity that might be helpful. Okay. It's like explain God and give 2 examples. Nobody can do that. All right. Whenever you think about God, you can think about, say, a triangle. Now, a triangle, as you can see, has 3 corners to it. And so God has one nature, a divine nature, and there are 3 persons in this divine nature. There's a Father, a Son, and a Holy Spirit. But they share this divine nature. Jesus has a human nature which does not intermingle with the divine nature. So the Son here has a human nature and a divine nature. And this will help you answer questions when people say, well, how could Jesus not know when he was coming back yet still be God? Right? Because whenever you ask a question about Jesus, you always have to ask 2 questions. Are you asking as man or as God? Did Jesus know when he was coming back as man? No. Did he know he was coming back as God? Yes. Did Jesus get hungry? As man, yes. As God, no. Did Jesus get tired? As God, no. As man, yes. So you always have to ask 2 questions. Now you can look at it this way or you can look at it this way. That God is one what with 3 who's, but Jesus is one who with 2 whats. And so whenever you talk about who 2, you got to talk about, are you talking about what 1 or what 2? Are you talking about what 1 divine nature or what 2 human nature when you're talking about who 2? This is the Abbott and Costello theology here. You get the idea, okay? Now this Trinity actually solves problems rather than creates them. Like, for example, how could God be love before he created anything? He's got no one to love. But if you're a Trinity, you have 3 persons. You have a lover, a loved one, and a spirit of love. God was completely content in the Trinity. He is love. He didn't have to create us because he was lonely or any of these things. He chose to create us to share his love with creatures he created, but he didn't have to.
Okay.
Make
Wait,
sense?
guys, one more. What is your best apologetic for, like, monotheism? Or, like, what is the best defense against, like, having, like, multiple gods, I guess?
Very quickly, you could use the cosmological argument we talked about, but the argument from composition, for example, is an argument, meaning that everything physical is composed, right? It's put together. It's made of parts. But whatever's made of parts has to be composed by another. You can't go on an infinite regress of composers. Eventually, you're going to have an uncomposed composer, a being that has no parts, that is infinite in every attribute. Now, it takes some philosophical reasoning to get to this point, but that would be the argument I would make, to point out that there has to be an uncomposed composer. Okay. So you're going to get back to an infinite God, and you can only have one infinite, because you can't, let me just show it to you real quickly. You can't have 2 infinite beings, because they'd have to differ in order, I'll put it this way, there can only be one infinite being. An infinite being lacks nothing, for two beings to differ, one must lack something the other has, but a being that lacks something is not infinite, therefore there can be only one infinite being.
Okay.
Make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Bryce.
Thank you.
Appreciate it, man. Yep. Yes, sir. What's your name?
Dawson.
Go ahead, Dawson.
So in my Bible class at school, we go over how the Bible talks about God, and it said, the Bible doesn't, it doesn't say that God exists. It like presumes that God exists. Like, what do you think about that?
You look at the scriptures, you got to have, if you're looking at the Old Testament, that ancient Israelite living in your head. And in ancient times, these ancient cultures, even though even like today in places like Africa and other places where they don't deny the supernatural, that's a very, very modern phenomena, right, after the Enlightenment, that we started to question things like the supernatural. So in the ancient times, you got to look at it. What was the intended audience for that text, right? It was the text. It was, you have to think about what was the context that produced the text, and in that context, the existence of God was not questioned. It was actually which God was the true God, right? Because again, we talk about Genesis, polemics, all these other things, and actually in the scriptures we see that there are other spiritual beings that are territorial, right? Paul talks about powers and principalities and dark forces, right? Rulers of the air. So we need to understand that in those times there was not a question. There was not a question in terms of whether God existed or not. So there was not a need for the Bible to give you an argument for the existence of God, because there was not a questioning of the supernatural. So I wouldn't say that you can look at the scriptures, and actually even Romans in the beginning of Romans, it tells you that you can come to the conclusion that there is a God by looking at what He's made. So you can reason from effect to cause. But it is in the scriptures, but it's not explicit because at that time it was not needed. There was nobody questioning the existence of the supernatural, and obviously God is a supernatural being.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Hi, my name's Wayne.
Wade or Wayne?
Wayne.
Wayne.
Yeah, I just want to say thanks. You guys are a blessing to me for sure.
Thank you.
So my question is, again, another theological issue. Now, while I'm having my conversation with myself in the shower, some days I have some trouble thinking about this, but how does Jesus' resurrection complete atonement rather than nullify atonement?
Why would it nullify atonement?
Just thinking about, okay, so his death was the
propitiation,
the sacrifice and the payment. So if his death was the payment, then how is his resurrection, how does it complete that atonement versus nullifying the atonement?
Well, I would say two things. One, the resurrection is a first fruit of what will happen to us. And secondly, if he hadn't resurrected from the dead, if he just died, how would we know there was an atonement? Right? We wouldn't. We would say, well, he just died just like everybody else. But since he rose from the dead, and therefore proved he was God because he predicted and accomplished his resurrection, then he's the one qualified to say, for the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. He's the ransom. And the resurrection validates he's the ransom. And the resurrection also lets us know what's going to happen to us when we reach our final state. We're going to be resurrected. It's also interesting when you think about this, Wayne. The kind of miracles that Jesus did were in 4 categories. And those 4 categories are the 4 categories that are trouble for us: sin, sickness, nature, and death. Jesus had the power over sin. He could forgive sins, and he was sinless himself. That's a problem for us. Sickness, obviously we get sick, that's a problem. Jesus has power over sickness. Nature can hurt us. Jesus can calm the storm, turn water into wine. He has the power over nature. And finally, our biggest issue is death, that we all die. Jesus has the power over death as well. So by being someone who can deal with sin and pain and sickness and nature and also death, he's saying, I'm the one that can fix all your problems and restore us back to Eden. So he's the Savior.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, this is a final question. We got to go. All right, thank you.
Hi, Frank. My name is Isaiah. I just had
Isaiah.
a quick question. So, if I remember correctly, you grew up Roman Catholic, correct?
Yes, I did, yeah.
I would just like to know why you moved away from that towards a more Protestant form of faith, and I'm just curious from your own personal experience.
Well, I
and
grew up
reasons.
in the Roman Catholic Church, and I always believed in God. I knew there had to be a first cause, but I didn't know who Jesus was. And it wasn't until I went through college and went into the Navy after college that I met the son of a Methodist minister, and he began to take me to a Baptist service. And I never was a lover of liturgy, because in the Catholic service there's a lot of liturgy, and it's just very repetitive, and the only new thing you get every week is the homily, which may be 5-7 minutes, right? So when I went to this Baptist service, which had a 40-minute sermon, I'm going, wow, I'm learning something here, right? And I didn't know much theology. I'm just trying to learn, okay? And then I had so many questions for this guy, he finally said, look, you just need to get Josh McDowell books, Evidence to Man's Verdict and More Than a Carpenter. So I came to faith by reading apologetics books, and then I did more research, and I agreed that you're saved by faith, not by works. And my co-author, Dr. Norman Geisler, grew up Catholic as well, went to Catholic University, and I'm not saying Catholics can't be saved. I've known plenty of Catholics who are saved, but I'm saying that his problem with the Roman Catholic Church from a theological perspective was the fact that he thought they had institutionalized salvation. What does that mean? That if you want to be saved, you got to come to us for these 7 sacraments, and then you'll be saved, okay? Where, of course, Paul says there's only one mediator between God and man, the Lord Christ Jesus, and we're saved by faith. It's a gift. It's not by works. It's grace. It's a gift. So I think the Protestants have that right, and that's basically why I'm a Protestant. Now, I have many friends who are Catholic. I know that people can be saved in the Catholic Church, but let me just give you my experience in the Catholic Church. I have never in my life heard the gospel in a Roman Catholic service, and I've been to hundreds of them, except the last one I went to, and that was my father's funeral, where the priest got up and he said, I talked to Frank the other day, and he has repented and has accepted the gift of salvation. He's with Jesus right now. That guy got it. Nobody else from the Roman Catholic pulpit, in my experience, that maybe there are people out there preaching the gospel, nobody from the Roman Catholic pulpit, in my experience, except that guy, ever spoke the gospel.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming out tonight. Next week we'll be at Rutgers University on Thursday night, and the week after, the following Thursday, we'll be down in Georgia at another university, so we'll be live streaming it. Thank you for being here. So those out there watching, wherever you